Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, lovely people. This is Marie Alessi with yet another Upspiral Brief interview. And today I've got the absolute honor to introduce you to Justin Stinson. I truly hope I pronounced your name correctly. I did not ask you that in a pre-chat.
Yep, perfect.
So Justin and I connected via LinkedIn actually, which is really, really beautiful because I get more and more people through LinkedIn come into my interviews, which is also beautiful. And what really drew me to you, Justin, is your story, how you wrote about your grandmother. And it was such a beautiful, honoring, loving post that I instantly connected with you and said, I do need you to come in front of camera with me. And I want to share your message with my audience. And I was so stoked that you said yes. And we got a little bit delayed. We'll get into all of that in our story. But before we do, would you do us the honor to introduce yourself to the audience? Welcome.
Yeah, thank you. I'm really honored to be here. I'm so excited to finally chat with you. And hopefully your audience appreciates everything that I'm able to talk about. And so I'm really looking forward to
100%.
it.
I'm just going to get this up on my phone so I see the comments as well. So please don't think I'm...
So, yeah, my name is Justin Stinson, and I live here in Iowa, here in the United States. And I work in telecommunications. I'm a general manager and CEO for a small telecommunications company. And then I also do executive and startup coaching. And so that's one of the things that draws me to LinkedIn is just the activity and, you know, connecting with people that are both in executive leadership as well as generating startups and just kind of bringing a different point of view and adding some creativity to their leadership style in their business. So
that's incredible. I absolutely love that because, you know, leadership styles is one of my topics that I used to deal with a lot before starting Loving Laugh After Loss. And speaking about which, I'd really love to talk to you about the topic of loss today. And you have some absolutely incredibly inspiring stories to share here. And I ask you permission up front to dive straight into it. So thank you so much for being open and vulnerable with us here, because this is exactly what we need in our Upspiral Brief interviews. We are having these conversations that nobody really dares to talk about. I hope you don't mind if we start with your best friend. I'm just going to hand this story right back to you. I don't even want to give a preview with that. What was your experience there?
Yeah, so I had just turned 18 years old and I was a senior in high school. And my best friend, we were inseparable brothers, literally did everything together. You know, we were everything. And we always kind of gave each other rides from one end of the parking lot to the other. And we just jump on the back of the other's truck and we would give each other a ride over. And one day the world essentially stopped spinning. I was giving him a ride and something happened and he fell off the back, hit his head and died the next day. I remember I could watch him in my rearview mirror, watch him fall, and I just knew instantly something major was happening. And so I run to him and I hold his head until the ambulance gets there. And still to this day, it's an image that continues to haunt me, because I can feel the warmth of the blood. I can see how many rocks were in the back of my hand as I sat there. I can feel, you know, every breath of air that was going, the sounds. It's incredible, just the amount of detail. This was 26 years ago, and I can still remember it just like it was yesterday. And he ended up dying the next day, and just dealing with that shock. Whereas an 18-year-old kid, you always think you're kind of invincible. And
absolutely.
You know, it was the same thing. We used to drive our trucks into the ditch, and we used to be stupid, and you know, you never thought anything would happen. And then just this one day, something so innocent turned into just the worst day of my life.
Justin, I know this is so confronting, and I really, really appreciate you talking about this because that obviously it raises a billion questions for somebody listening to this. When you shared this story with me, I instantly had goosebumps. I instantly got visions myself, and I wasn't even there. That thinking about how that would feel, and exactly what you said. I instantly thought of how that would feel on your hand, the blood on your hand, and all these details. Can I ask? Did you have a chance to talk to him before he passed? After that happened?
No, I didn't. I remember while we're laying there, he was convulsing, and I just remember yelling at him that, "Don't you die on me! Don't you dare die on me!"
Yeah.
And just screaming that at the top of my lungs, and feeling like the ambulance was never going to get there. I mean, it felt like an hour that I was sitting there holding him, and it was probably 10 minutes. I mean, it wasn't very long. I remember them asking while I was sitting there what his dad's name was, and in that moment I couldn't remember. And his simple name's David.
Of course. Yeah.
And so I remember them calling him, and I remember his dad showing up in the middle of this whole thing, and just the fear on his eyes, seeing what's going on in front of him. And just starting to realize the magnitude of what had just happened when I saw the fear in his eyes. And then later on, having to see his family, his mom, his sister. He had a handicapped brother that he was in charge of taking care of on a pretty regular basis, and just seeing just the pain and sorrow on their faces. His mom was really incredible. She would come up, and even after the accident, after he was gone, she would call me up and ask me if I could come over and just give her some boy hugs.
Wow.
And I felt like that was pretty incredible. Just some amazing strength from somebody like that could to bring somebody in that had such an impact on the end of his life, and such an impact to the family, to still call me and ask me to come do that for her.
That's incredible.
Yeah. And so I never really got to have that kind of connection with his dad or his sister. I think there was just so much hurt and pain that I could never blame him, as much as I might want that. It was a difficult situation for sure. And then after that, for the longest time, I just kind of stuffed those feelings. I tried to hide from it. I lived a really reckless life for a while. I'd literally go rock climbing with no ropes, just because if I fell and died, who cares? It didn't matter to me. I'd drive really fast. I would take chances that in my normal life I never would have. But after this whole accident, it's just like, who cares? I lost at that time the most important thing in my life. And so I lived like that pretty much until I ended up having kids.
Wow.
And
that was my next question. How and when did you turn that around? It took you till that point.
It took me a few years.
Yourself.
So I ended up having kids
incredible.
Relatively early on, and it kind of puts things back in perspective, because you now have something that relies on you, and you can't live that same way. And so it kind of brings you back down to earth. But during that whole period, I kind of started to push his family away. It's obviously very
emotional,
tough topic still.
Yeah, no, I totally understand it. It brings so much back. Like even I feel that, and I was not even involved. So I just want to take a quick break and say thank you so much for sharing this, because I can only imagine and I can feel how heavy that still gets for you when you reconnect to that story, because this really obviously had such an imprint in your life, and what I would love to know and what I would love for you to share, because, hearing that story and reading your story about your grandma, I can just see how much has shifted in your life and how much appreciation for life you have and for the life lessons that you have gained from this. I often talk about the hidden gifts in adversity. And when you say that to somebody so shortly after the adversity, it feels like a slap in the face. But once you work through things and you process things, can you talk a little bit about that? What were your hidden gifts in adversity that you gained from this, the lessons you gained from this, to get you to the space, how you could write in such beautiful words about your grandmother? And we're going to share a little bit about that too, but I'd love to hear about that process, what
Yeah.
happened within you.
Yeah. I think over time, and I think maturity starts to kick in a little bit, and you realize that life is really fragile. That I was able to kind of use the same story and talk to high school kids about it, talk to youth groups, talk to retired individuals about kind of how my story shaped me. And throughout my career, it's kind of shaped how I approach business and the type of career I wanted to go into and the type of major I went into when I went to college, and just kind of how I viewed the world. Instead of everything being really black and white, I realized that there's so many different ways to approach life and look at it. And that kind of opened up the opportunity to look at the creativity in my world. And it was always something that was sort of interesting for me, but I didn't know how to approach it. And so I ended up actually majoring in photography in college, and it was a way for me to sort of capture the beauty of the world.
I love that.
I've never really been one to go into picturing photographing like humans, because I've always said that they act for the camera, and I'd prefer the authenticity of just nature. And so I would photograph trains, I'd photograph weather, nature, still life, things like that. And so I think that creates kind of this beauty with how you approach life and how you view everything. And so kind of transitioning into, my grandmother's death, which just happened a couple of years ago, I guess about a year ago, actually. She was 102, and
incredible. What a gift.
Yeah. And one of the strongest, most inspiring women I've probably ever known, because she grew up in the Depression, obviously, and lived on an 80-acre farm. And I would go there every summer, and I'd spend the entire summer on their farm. Her husband had a stroke, and his entire left side was paralyzed. And so it was one of my favorite things, is to go there and spend time with him and help him, push him in his wheelchair. We didn't get into all sorts of different trouble. I remember at one point we found like a little tin cup, and we would just sit outside a store while my grandma is shopping, and we just sit there and bang the cup and pretend like we were asking for money, and nobody ever stopped or anything, but he just wanted to be funny. And then he'd say he wanted to buy something, and my grandma would be like, well, we don't have money for that. He's like, well, we can just take it out of the checkbook. We could just write a check. And so it's always just kind of watching her and her laughter that came with it. And, she just kind of played along with it and understood kind of where he was coming from, that this was just kind of his joy, dealing with kind of some difficult physical limitations. And I think it helped me understand and appreciate him more about what he stood for. But even as a young person, I could just see how hard she worked. She'd work out in her garden. She had a huge garden that she would teach me all about, the plants and how to care for the garden. And then she taught me how to taught me how to sew. And so even to this day,
I like that.
I'm the only one in my house that can sew a
Wow.
hole, and I'm not good at it, but I can get it.
I love that you say that, because
thing.
it's so rare for a man to be able to sew, and my husband used to be able to do that, and I learned it from a very young age, and I'm teaching my boys now to do it too, because I think it's such a handy skill to have for little things.
It is. It's a really handy trait, and again, I mean, it's just enough to get me by, and I can patch a hole and I can sew a button on, and that's about it. But usually that's all you need. So she several years ago, when she was about 96, 97, she fell and broke her hip.
Oh, wow.
And usually at that age, when somebody falls and breaks their hip, it kind of spells towards the end. And so we were all preparing for this. And so we were just, I went and visited her before I moved out to Iowa and said, hey, if you make it to 100, I'll come see you, for your big 100th birthday and all this different stuff. And she's like, well, I'll see you then. She didn't know any different. And so sure enough, she made it to that. And, we were able to celebrate a big 100th birthday party for her. And
that's awesome.
And people would always ask kind of what the secret to her long life was. And she'd always say that it's M&Ms. Not like peanut M&Ms. It had to be regular M&Ms.
That in your story. I love it.
And so that was the one thing that just always kept her alive. And she'd eat pounds of M&Ms. And at that age, you don't really think of the sugar intake or anything like that. You can eat whatever you want. And she just would eat and eat and eat. And it was just so cute, because she just had a little jar right next to her chair, and just pick them up as she's having conversations. She'd offer them to everybody in the place she was living. And she was just kind of known for having her M&Ms, and people would send her pounds and pounds of M&Ms on a regular basis.
What was her first name?
Irene.
Okay. Just checking if it started with an M as well. So
right. No. So
Justin, can I ask you? Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt your phone. I just wanted to say, with your grandmother's incredible, beautiful approach to life and life wisdom, did she, and if so, how did she help you through the loss of your best friend at that age? Did you have a lot of contact with her back then, or did that happen later on in life, or where were you at that? Because you said that you sort of checked out for a bit for a few years after that. Did you allow her in to help you through that, or not really?
I didn't much, because he ended up dying just a couple of years prior. John, my friend, died just a couple of years before my grandfather died. And so my grandfather was failing, and so I didn't want to have to put that burden on her. So we really didn't talk about it much. I still visited with her, and I still spoke with her, but we never really talked about the accident at all. We talked about Grandpa, and we talked about that. She did know about it. Yep. And I think we were just able to, that was kind of the one area of normal in my life. And when you're going through something like that, sometimes everybody sort of treats you different. And they're kind of like, oh, are you okay? Hey, how you doing? And at that point, I didn't want that. I just wanted to be treated normal. And
I can still
she was that one normal.
I love that you say that, because I often say to people, sympathy doesn't help me at all. Empathy, that's all right. Of course, it's nice, but I often wait for it, because in particular with my story, as soon as people get to know you, like, what do you do? And I tell them, well, I run a global movement called Loving Love After Loss. And I started that after my husband passed. Instantly, oh, I'm so sorry. Can you please stop that? Like, I understand where people are coming from. It's a really beautiful
Mhm.
and loving intention, yet it doesn't help me at all for
Right.
people to constantly shower me with sympathy, because I feel I'm a very happy and bubbly person, and I'm not a typical widow wearing black all the time, as you can see. So
Right.
I just, I love life. I really do. And of course, I have my waves going through, and I'm not saying that to explain, oh, I'm grieving anyway. I'm just saying that because everybody's got waves that they're going through.
Mhm.
So the one thing before we're gonna come back to your grandmother, because I'd really love to continue that story, and I know we're going a bit back and forth, but the one thing I really
That's
want
okay.
to know is, um, after John passed, how did you actually really come back to making the decision that your life matters? Because for a while you were quite reckless with it, and you said it all changed when you have had kids, but it's nothing that you're like, your kid is born and clap, you're back to
Yeah.
life. There is a process that goes through internally, and with your mind and with your heart. Can you share a bit about that? Because I think that's the really inspiring part that you've gone through here.
Yeah, that's a really good point because um, I can remember I had one moment that kind of brought me back to life a little bit that
Mm,
said, well, you need to slow down just a little bit
yeah.
because, and I was driving fast really one night. I was coming home from work and it was late, it was raining, it was really dark. And I was driving roads that I knew all the time anyway.
Mm,
And um, I ended up taking this curve and just spun out. And I remember watching this pole coming right at me, and there's nothing I could do. I mean, I was just out of control. And I
mm.
remember missing that pole by about a foot. All the skid
Wow.
marks, I got out of the car afterwards and I watched the skid marks because my car went into mud and that's what ended up stopping me. And if I'd kept spinning, I probably would have hit that pole going about 60 or
Yeah.
65 miles per hour,
Wow.
which would have killed me. I
Yeah.
was in a small car, nothing to
Mm,
stop me.
yeah.
That was before airbags were a thing.
I just wanted to say, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Mm,
so I remember I was sitting there trying to figure out how I was going to get my car out. And then this guy came up and said, dude, looks like you're kind of stuck. You all right? And I said, I'm fine. I'll figure it out. And I was trying to push him away. I didn't want to see him
yeah.
because I was having a moment where it was a little bit of shock, a little bit of
Yeah.
sadness,
Mm,
really kind of mad at myself that I let that happen. Um, and he's all, nah, I'll help you. And he didn't know the story. I'm a total stranger. And so he just starts hooking up my car and starts pulling it out. He's all, I'm not going to charge you this time. And just kind of joking and stuff. And at that moment, I'm like, something doesn't feel right in my life. And I don't understand why I'm pushing myself to essentially accidentally kill myself, is
mm,
basically what I felt like I was doing. And so from that moment, I started to really start to slow down. I still drove fast. I still made stupid decisions. I mean, I was still a teenager going through a really, really tough time.
mm,
But I realized that, you know, somebody needs to live his life for him because he's not able to. And I wanted his family to be proud
I
of me.
love that. I love
And
that.
so that's when I decided that I'm going to apply for college. I'm going to pursue some things that both of us loved. And so that's where I ended up meeting my wife.
Mm,
That's where kind of my family started to take hold. Is we ended up having my son. I ended up having two more after that, so I've got three boys
mm.
myself.
Oh, wow.
Um, and that
How
that
old are
kind of
they
gave me
now?
an opportunity. So my oldest is 23,
Yeah.
and then 22, and then 18. I'm sorry,
Wow.
20 and 18. 23,
Yeah.
20, and 18.
Yeah.
um,
Amazing.
and amazing boys. But I got
Mhm.
to so my oldest son, his middle name is John, and
Mm,
so um, I got to kind of carry on his legacy through his
mm,
name,
yeah.
through one of my boys, and just kind of show that love for both of them, and
Mm,
explain to my son also kind of tell him the story so he understands the story and what happened, and
Mm,
kind of the pain that it put me through, and the importance of had that name with his. And
mm.
I thought that was really important as I was growing up and, building a family and
That's
having
beautiful.
them understand. Yeah.
Yeah, that's absolutely beautiful. And can I also ask, because everybody's experience is so very different when it comes to how you deal with um, such a close friend of yours passing so early. And in my case, it was my husband, and I actually also lost a very very close friend very early, not as early as you. And it's not about comparing, but it was in his late 20s, or he had just turned 30. I can't even remember the exact age, but we were all in our late 20s, early 30s when that happened. And it was just a freak accident in a club as well, where somebody pushed him and hit the back of his head, and was put into induced coma, and then 2 days later he passed. So it was really, it hit us, because as you said, at that age, 18, 30, you really think you're invincible, and
Yep.
I would love to know, did that change the way you raised your kids? As in, there is that danger of becoming a hovering parent and,
Hmm.
constantly having those fears when they're mucking around that something could happen. I know that for me, my fear was quite heightened for a while after Rob passed, that something would happen to Flynn and Jed, my sons, and I'd just love to know, did that change the way you raised them, or
Oh yeah.
when
Yeah.
when did you get your lightness back, or when
Yeah.
it's not reckless, but yeah.
Right. Yeah, it absolutely changed the way I approached childcare. And I would say I was probably much more of, they call it a helicopter parent or
Mm,
whatever,
yeah.
just because it was so fresh. I mean, it was just
Mm,
within a few years of it happening.
yeah.
And all of a sudden, I'm now a young father
Mm,
and afraid of losing the next most important thing in my life.
yeah.
And so, even, they climb the gym stuff, and I'd be right there, kind of
Oh, yeah.
guarding him,
Yeah.
making sure he doesn't fall.
I
We
can
go
only
to
imagine.
sporting events, and I wouldn't sit in the upper rows. I had to be
Mm,
down below because I didn't
yeah.
want to imagine
Jump and
them
run.
falling over the edge.
Mm,
And it's so funny because even now, I still have that same thing. Like if they're getting up, I find my arm going over and trying to push them
yeah.
back so they don't get too close to the edge.
Yeah.
And so I think that it's a natural reaction.
Mm,
Um, and that's been one of the hardest things is throughout all of these different losses that I've had is that, you know, when people get really close to me, they die is kind of
mm,
how I've viewed it over the period of time. And so
yeah.
I'm so, I still find myself very guarded um,
Mm,
as far as letting people in too close, but
mm,
then I'm also very protective of those that are close to me and trying to
yeah.
prevent anything from happening. And I know that I'll never be able to prevent everything. Um,
Yeah.
and I joke that I'm kind of a closet control freak.
Mm,
I like to have control over things that can protect people. And
yeah.
so it was, as my kids got older, there's those obvious big things that would happen, driver's license. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Um, that was one of the biggest things when my
Don't
son got
want to
his
think
driver's
about it yet.
license. Yeah. Um, but that that moment was really huge for me because when I was young and I had just started driving, essentially within a couple of years of starting to drive,
Mm,
that's when everything happened. And so
yeah.
the idea of my son having that kind of control and having that
Yeah.
responsibility that something like
Yeah.
that could happen again, and a bad decision as a young kid can completely change the lives of so many different people.
Yeah.
Um, and so I was really hesitant to let him get his
Mm,
license, let him get behind the wheel for the first time. I mean, I was so overprotective when it came to something like that that, you know, I know I drove him crazy trying to make sure,
mm.
no, don't don't break yet, don't turn yet, no, slow down. And I think most parents are like that, but I probably took it to a
Mm,
whole other extreme just because of the
yeah.
past experience there.
Yeah.
Um,
On that note, Justin, I'm also grateful. again, coming back to you saying, yes, I'm open to talking about all of that. So there's a lot of really, really vulnerable topics for you today. So I cannot thank you enough for being so open to talk about all these things, because I can very much relate to that, the being the controlling parent and trying to control everything. And we all know that we cannot control what happens in life. And this brings me to the topic why we actually had to delay our interview, because we already had our interview scheduled quite a few months ago. And you said, can we touch base again in about half a year's time? Do you want to share what was going on in your life, why we had to postpone, and where you are at with that now?
Yeah. So just after we had scheduled it, my wife she had this nagging cough for probably 6-8 months. And, they thought it was allergies. And so they gave her some medicine, and then they thought it was something else, and just never went away. And it started to get really, really bad. And so she decided to go in and request a chest x-ray, and they found something in the chest x-ray. And so then we had to follow up. We had to do a CAT scan, and it showed that it was cancer, or there was essentially a mass in there. And so we ended up doing the biopsy, and sure enough, it ended up coming back as small cell lung cancer.
Yeah.
She's never smoked a day in her life. She's never worked in an environment that would promote this type of lung cancer. It's really common among smokers. It's really uncommon among those that didn't smoke. And so, we're just kind of in this nightmare for the longest time, because it seems like every day you're either waiting for the next amount of news, or the news that you are getting is bad news.
Yeah.
And so we found out that when we dug in, we met with the oncologist and basically asked kind of what are we looking at?
Yeah.
He's all, you've got a 15% chance of living. So not only is that hard to take, but then you have to come home and you have to tell your kids that.
Yeah. So were you transparent with your kids from the get-go?
We agreed right off the bat that we're gonna be open and honest about everything, because they're old enough to understand, and they need to understand.
That really helps.
Yeah, as she's going through treatments, they need to understand what they're looking at, and they need to essentially prepare themselves for what we're dealing with, and understand the fight that she's putting into this. And so not long after that, she started her first round of chemo, and it was difficult. People talk about the impacts of it, and you get sick, you lose your hair, the fatigue, all of that. It's all real.
And nauseousness.
It's hard, and it's hard on the family around her. I think that's something that doesn't always get looked at, is the impact of what everybody's, because you're helpless. There's nothing.
That's exactly the word that came to mind. Yeah, the helplessness that you feel when you have to watch somebody you love so much go through that.
Right.
And
she's being sick, and you can
15%.
go grab a towel. Yeah.
It's not zero.
So, exactly.
Yeah.
So she did get through her chemo, and in December she had her scans, and they showed that she was disease free. And it doesn't mean she's cancer free, but it means that there's no disease showing in that lung.
Yeah. That's incredible.
So now we're on a path of every 3 months we have scans to see if it's spread, where it's come back. So small cell lung cancer is sort of unique because it lives within the cellular system, rather than being a tumor that you can just operate and remove, which is non-small cell cancer. So right now we live in a world where it's not if it'll come back, it's when and where it'll come back. And so we're still in this process. So she had scans in March, and those came back clear. And so it's like a celebration. So you take those moments and you just celebrate. She's been able to travel, visit my son down in Florida, visit family all over the place.
Yeah.
So she's really taking advantage of the time that she has to maximize living her life. So her next set of scans are coming up in June. we hope for obviously the same results.
Yeah.
But so we basically live our lives in 3-month increments now. And so every little thing we celebrate. In January, she ended up getting COVID and got COVID pneumonia, which then led into radiation pneumatitis. And she got really, really, really sick.
I can only imagine.
And got put on steroids, and she was able to fight through and come through that as well. There were days I'd come home from work and think, nope, today's the day. I need to prepare. You know, I need to make sure the will is in place. I need to make sure that I have phone numbers in place. I need to make sure I have bank account access information, all this different stuff. And then sure enough,
Completely
she pulls back
living on
through
edge.
again. So
I can only imagine. I just love your view on that, you know, that you guys just celebrate every milestone, every good news that you get. And I just want to salute your wife, you know, incredible strength. It's just so beautiful. And I love, like, you know, just looking at you as a family. I don't even know you guys personally, but just from listening to you, I just feel that you guys are very, very strong and connected, which is really beautiful. And even more so knowing what I know now, because a few of those things I didn't even know before we chatted. I just can't thank you enough for sharing your super valuable time. I know everybody's time is valuable, but yours even more so right now. So I cannot thank you enough for being here and sharing your story so authentically. And I would love for you, you know, before we wrap up the interview here, what is your number one driver that you feel that really got you through all of these experiences, through losing your best friend so early, through losing your grandmother? And I know that so many people say, oh, at least you turned 102. It doesn't matter how old people are when we have such a strong connection to them, when they're such an amazing influence in our lives. When we lose them, it will always be too early, you know. And then also, you know, dealing with the sickness of your wife and clinging on to those 15% and really putting all our efforts into focusing on that. What is your motivational driver through all of that, that we can cut a little slice off for us as well?
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard. And I would say I'm always healing. You know, I am still working through just the pain and the trauma and the hurt and the guilt of so many different things. I deal with it every single day, and some days are a lot better than others. But I think the thing that's sort of gotten me through is I found a passion in photography and the arts and creativity. And even though that wasn't necessarily the industry that I went into for my career, I've been able to associate it with the rest of my career in telecommunications and just business in general. And so having that passion that I can draw on and apply to all different sorts of my life, I think it's put me in positions to try things I probably wouldn't have in the past, to treat people a completely different way, and just focus on that kindness. And you know, one of my favorite quotes is, everybody's fighting a battle that you know nothing about. Just be kind.
Absolutely.
And those are words that I live by. And so, you know, I think those things are things that continue to drive me. I'm not a perfect person. I make a ton of mistakes every single day, but I continue to learn from it, and I continue to draw on those passions that have kind of always brought me back. And that's sort of my safe spot, is going back into that creative world. So
I think it's incredible to have that, because, you know, a creative outlet, I feel always helps with the healing. I'm a big believer in that. And I just want to say thank you so much for your time here, and in particular for being so raw and vulnerable with us, and that I was allowed to ask you questions so directly. I really, really appreciate that. It means so much to me. And Justin, I'm also going to invite you into my group. So if people have any comments or questions, I really invite you to put them in the comments below so Justin can get back to you. And with that being said, I just want to say thank you. I really, really appreciate your time. And I'll be sending bucket loads of love and healing vibes to your beautiful wife. And say hi to your whole family for me. I really appreciate you being here with us today. So
I will.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for the platform and the opportunity to share this. It's amazing.
It was an absolute honor. So thank you so much. And everyone watching this at home, thank you for being here. And this is Justin and Marie signing off. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Bye.